Hello, r slash Kollywood family, and welcome to the r slash Kollywood podcast. We are super excited to be here today to discuss one of Tamil cinema's uh, most ambitious films. And over the last few weeks, we've had the pleasure and privilege of discussing a lot of topics with like-minded friends from the Kohli family. And if you've heard our Valentine's Day special podcast, you might be familiar with Pirate King. So I have with me Pirate King, and the two of us are going to discuss Hera, which almost to this day completes 25 years since its release, and that's 25 years of really being one of Tamil cinema's most ambitious and most relevant films, and probably one of those films that will be talked about every few years. And so I'm happy to welcome Pirate King. Hi, Pirate King.
Hey, நான் ரொம்ப நல்லா இருக்கேன். Thank you so much for having me again. It was a blast talking with the. See, you weren't there in the romance podcast,
Yeah, I
but it was
wasn't
really a
there.
blast
Yeah.
talking with all the.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was great talking with all the others about some of their favorite romance movies, and I felt I felt like the odd man out bringing up Salangai Oli amongst all of the newer movies that everything brought up. I was really sort of excited to talk about how much that movie was super impactful to me. It's definitely one of my favorite Kamal movies, and again, now I'm really happy here today to talk about another Kamal movie that I really like. So yeah, excited.
Pirate. So before we kind of get into the nitty gritty of the film, right? I have a question for you, right? Okay, where did you first watch it?
Mhm.
And if you had to use one word to describe Hayram, what would it be?
I so where did I watch it? I definitely did not get to watch it in the theater. I was pretty young back then. So I also remember actually when the movie released, seeing as a very young kid on TV a couple of like different Kamal interviews and all of this stuff. And to be honest, like the whole memory of it, for me is the song that they dance to. I remember very vividly remembering, oh, Shah Rukh Khan is in this film because back then as a young kid I had just watched Kuch Kuch Hota Hai and Dil To Pagal Hai. So seeing Shah Rukh Khan in the film, seeing a lot of these other like Bollywood actors in the film is something that's etched into my memory. And then of course, Ramaranalum, Babaranalum song was like sort of such a like a pretty trendsetter at the time that in my school's annual day that used to sort of be the go-to dance and fun and things like that. So that was my earliest memory of Hayram. And so what is the one word that comes to my mind? Um, Oddly enough, I don't think there's any correlation, but I kept thinking about this, and the word that comes to my mind is taxi driver, and I'll probably elaborate
Like
more
the De
about it
Niro,
when we go into the
the
movie.
De Niro Scorsese taxi driver. You mean?
Correct. Yep.
Okay, very interesting. I would not have come up with that. Go on.
I just feel like the the thesis and the exploration of the character of Saket Ram has some sort of parallels to the taxi driver character played by Robert De Niro. I feel like the extent to which they delve into his psyche. I don't
Yeah,
think
yeah,
I've seen that in any other Tamil film before. So that I think that was one of the main things that I take away from Hey Ram right now.
right.
More than all of the other things that come to mind, that is the thing that strikes me a lot. But yeah, I'm
Also,
excited to hear about your
yeah.
yeah.
Now that you mention it, right, I think you make a very good point. Because I think it's one of those rare films where you have a character who's caught in a maelstrom of
Mhm.
something. Taxi driver, De Niro's caught up in the whole crime piece and whatnot. But the films, both Hayram and Taxi Driver, to a large extent, it has less to do with the physical impact. I mean, yes, it exists, but I think the whole narrative crux is on the psychological impact of those incidents on those characters, right? I mean, that is why we are
Mhm.
watching those films.
Mhm.
I mean, the story progression or the character arc is sort of secondary in some sense, and it's a
Mhm.
deliberate choice in the way it's kind of narrated that way. But yeah, I mean, I didn't consciously think of it that way, but now that you mention it, yeah, it kind of makes sense why you have that taxi driver sort of influence, and kind of Kamal being Kamal, right? I wouldn't be surprised if
Yeah.
he kind of leaned on that inspiration in a very tangential way while writing the script for Hey Ram. So Yeah, I mean, talking about when I first watched it. Okay, so
Hmm.
one of my childhood stories. Again, I always have these very interesting anecdotes. So I happened to watch it for the very first time in Hindi on
Hmm.
cable TV, and I watched it pretty
Nice.
much 1 week after the film released. Now, I was also
Oh
very
wow.
young,
Okay.
and obviously there's a lot of stuff in there which a person of my age should not be watching, right? But the point is, we didn't know that,
Right. Right.
right? And of
Hmm.
course, அப்பெல்லாம் வந்து கேபிள், see, at least in where I used to live in the north, right? So புது படம்லாம் போட்டுருவாங்க கேபிளில் போட்டு, and திருட்டு விசிடி தான். So you will have like a really crappy ass print with really bad sound, which was
Hmm.
much worse than Heyram because the entire thing is sync sound. It was not
Right.
recorded or dubbed, right? So அதனால
Hmm.
the sync sound, the natural sound itself is a bit suppressed, and when you watch it on a cam print, it's even worse, right? And
Wow.
between
Okay. Yeah.
me trying to shield my eyes away from some of the more egregious stuff, the violent stuff, as well as the more sort of romantic pieces, and just the general
Hmm.
complexity of the narrative and subject matter, I completely lost it. I mean, obviously it wasn't a film targeted towards me, which is
Hmm.
and the only reason I wanted to watch it was, like you said, Shah Rukh was there in it. And to me, what was more amazing was SRK was speaking Hindi. SRK was
Yeah.
speaking Tamil.
Tamil.
Although I watched the Hindi
Yeah.
version, but obviously I seen the trailer. He's speaking Tamil, and then Rani Mukherjee is speaking Tamil. என்னையா இது, இந்த மாதிரிலாம். And obviously, right, SRK is not a fluent speaker, so that ஒரு மாதிரியான ஒரு accent
Yeah.
வரும் பேசுற போது. So like, this is weird, right? And no way in
Hmm.
hell I would have been allowed to go and watch the film in the cinemas. And anyway, அங்க நான் பாம்பேல இருக்கிற போச்சு, you would not get the Tamil release anyway back in 2000. So we had to watch the Hindi version, and
Right.
that was clearly marked adults only, especially with that poster of Kamal and Rani Mukherjee making out, right? So that was like that was a big sort of
Yep.
part of the publicity campaign, which I think, to be very honest, doesn't do the film justice. It does the film a massive disservice, in my opinion, because the film is not some weird erotic drama or anything. It's actually a very, very deep, like I said, psychological study. And if I were to
Hmm.
use
Yep.
one film, and in subsequent years, obviously I watched the film properly multiple times, appreciated all the nuances, agreed with a lot of it, disagreed with a lot of it. We'll come to that in a bit. Um, if I were to describe it in one word, I would say, and I'm going to use a slightly new constructed word, I would say 360-degree ambition. Because to me, this is
Mm.
probably the most ambitious film in Tamil cinema, but and not just
Hmm.
from a unilateral perspective. It is ambitious in every sense of the word, right? Right from the choice of
Right.
subject matter, the way the film is staged, the way the screenplay is structured, the way you
Hmm.
have these thematic elements woven in, and also sort of these abstractions in the film. It- the way you as an audience have to, if you watch the Tamil version, right, there are points in the film, it'll transition to Bengali, it'll transition to Hindi, transition to
Yeah.
Marathi,
Yeah.
and so on. It really challenges you as a viewer in kind of trying to make sense of the story, and
Hmm.
it pushes the
Yep.
envelope in every single department. Even if the output, depending on your perspective, might be a sixer all the way through, or maybe there are some misses here and there, right? So really, 360
Hmm.
degree ambition is how I would describe it.
It's funny you bring it up because I kind of would want to add the word like throwaway 360 ambition because thinking about like how this film was made, right? It was made while he was struggling with Marudanayagam
Yeah,
and he wanted to like make a different film,
yeah,
but to the same standards and quality of how he expected, like he wanted to make films with. So it's funny that like it's not something that he actively like planned, set out stage for, and things like that. It just happened as like I'm stuck here making this thing that I really want to make. I'm
yeah,
not getting forward with it, and all the fans are sort of upset. I think I've read somewhere that there were like posters during that like year from his fans saying this is like a dark year for us because there's no
yeah,
Kamal film releasing at this time. So seeing all that, like him coming out and making this, and adding to all of the things you said, that just makes it way more impressive.
yeah. It indeed. Yeah, I
In his
still
back
remember.
pocket, and then he just put it out.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is probably that phase when Kamal was really like pushing himself a lot, right? This period
Hmm.
of Kamal's filmography, right, the post Nayagan until I would say Vishwarupam 1 phase, right? It's probably the
Mhm.
strongest phase in his career, if you think about it. I'm kind of ignoring the KB era a bit because, let's face it, I mean, the KB films, he was not driving a lot of that stuff. It was KB himself doing it. Balachandra was doing that, right? And then you
Right.
had this
Right.
weird phase in this masala hero phase, and then the Sakalagala Valnavan, and what is that film where Gurua, where he plays a weird superhero and all that. He had that weird phase of his where he kind of wanted to be a masala hero, but it was with mixed results.
Mhm.
And then you had, Nayagan, and then from there on, it was one sixer after the other, right? And that pretty much
Mhm.
lasted. And all his films subsequently were quite ambitious in their own right.
Mhm.
Even something as banal as Ravesh and Mugi had its own level of ambition. Right. Okay. I think so. Now that we've kind of discussed how he's watched it and what did we like, very very briefly discuss what we thought about the film. Maybe we can go a bit deeper into it, right? So
Mhm.
what makes Hayram so special, right? And I think this is where we'll have a lot of meat in this conversation. So, Pirate, what is that one thing that makes Hayram special for you? Or you can go into multiple things as well. So, over to you.
Mm, okay, so I think I just have a sense that whenever Kamal either portrays characters who have issues mentally, or when he tries to delve into their psyche, it's like a really interesting like sort of insight. And then I also like the way he sort of, especially like the films that he has directed, like the main two things that I can think of and I would probably want to compare is like Virumandi and this film. I can see that there's this sense of like unreliable narrator thing that's going on in both films, and then B, it's a lot about like showing you what this character is doing, but then the presentation or the portrayal of who he actually is kind of very different. And you see that like from this film, from the very start, where the grandson and the doctor are talking about who this person is that's lying on the bed. And for me, the I think the most unique USP of this film is Kamal's ability to weave the narrative of the film around all of the historical stuff that happens and come out um, with this very alternate history sort of version of what his character played a role in all of those events and how it kind of ultimately comes down to the end of the day. So it's this really interesting portrayal of what happens to somebody who gives into this rage and anger and then loses his way. And it's really like a soul searching film that I don't think has been explored to this depth by any other person, or I haven't seen that in any other film. Maybe I'll probably stop with that. And
I
yeah, that's actually a good point to explore.
Yeah, I think to a last point, Pirate, right? You make a very good point here. I don't think even Kamal himself has explored it to that depth before or after Heyram. You take a film like Alavandan, right? I mean, yes, that's a
Hmm.
different sort of genre, but again, it's to do with a man's psychology in some sense. Again, I think it ended up being a bit superficial, right? Similarly, in
Hmm.
Vishwarupam, I think a lot of the plot baggage took away from sort of Vissam's psyche in some sense, right? And it didn't really
Hmm.
help that Vishwarupan 2 was not such a good film. Heyram, like you
Right.
rightly said, it is essentially, I would say in some sense, it's not a character's journey, it is the journey of a character's psyche. You clearly see that.
Hmm.
And you also see that in sort of some of those narrative choices as well. Like, again, there's this one scene towards the end of the film, again one of those slightly controversial scenes where he kind of is in bed with his second wife, but then he imagines that he's making love to the gun and so on, right? Really really
Hmm.
abstract ideas, really really abstract imagery, but
Hmm.
it makes sense. It makes sense because that is sort of that is, it is them trying to get into the chaos in his head, right?
Hmm.
And this is a person
Yep.
who's heavily troubled, whose mind is literally a tornado of sorts. I mean, I think they also show a
Hmm.
tornado in that scene that I'm talking about, but that's literally how they play it, right? um,
Right.
which to me was a very unique choice in some ways, because it's very easy to get distracted by all the other things that happens around the film, And I think a lot of people focus more on the broader sort of alternate history story, or how they connected to, real historical events like direct action day, and then, ultimately, culminate the either number Indian independence, and then finally culminating in
Hmm.
Gandhi's assassination and so on, right? I think those are like historical milestones, but I think that's not the
Right.
point of the film in some sense, right?
Yep.
Which to me was a, like you
Yep.
said, it's a very interesting take on it. And also, yeah, the historical historicity piece was actually very good. I mean, the amount of effort that Kamal's put in this film, right, in getting those details, man, it is something else. It is absolutely
Mhm.
amazing, both from just the narrative standpoint, but also like visually. Like when they
Exactly.
show
Yeah.
when they show like the start and the Harappa Mohenjo-daro, like Mohenjo-daro, right? Not Harappa, but Mohenjo-daro excavation site.
Hmm.
That site, it's barely what, a 5 minute sequence, 3 minute sequence, maybe. அதுல வந்து ஒரு
Hmm.
detailing இருக்கும். That is amazing,
Right.
right? And
Hmm.
similarly, when Rani Mukherjee dies, and then eventually Saket moves back to, I forget, Tanjavur or Kumbakonam, I forget, one of those temple towns. அங்க வந்து
Yeah.
ஒரு
Yeah.
ஒரு 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 scale இருக்கு. The level of depth you go for small things in this film, it's unprecedented. It's absolutely brilliant how
Hmm.
they kind of um, do that. And எனக்கு இன்னொன்று என்ன தோணுதுன்னா, one big strength in this film was Ilayaraja, right? See, the songs for
Yes.
me like were a bit of a hit or a miss, to be very honest. Like Nee Partha Parve, amazing song, absolutely love it, right?
Hmm.
Ramananalo, Babaranalo, I think it's a fun song, but I don't know. I find the instrumentation to be quite weak in that. But the score, my God, the score.
Yeah.
That is absolutely like, இப்போ பேசுற போச்சு எனக்கு goosebumps வருது. Like the score, especially when Saket kind of rushes out and he starts killing people the first time in Calcutta, right?
Hmm.
That score
Hmm.
where he's walking through that fire and he's all bloodied and whatnot. Amazing
Yep.
score. What did you think of the score, by the way?
Again, I think this is one of those other things where I almost feel like this film was set up to fail in different ways, and then miraculously somehow it kept getting better during the making. So right, like during music, I think
Yeah.
Kamal initially went to like L
El
Subramaniam or
Subramaniam, ama,
Vaidyanathan.
ama, ama. El
Yeah,
Subramaniam.
that was a controversy.
Yeah.
The person walked out,
Yeah.
and then Kamal went back to Ilayaraja,
Yeah.
and for him to compose everything with already shot
Yeah.
sequences and to come up with this is like, yeah, nothing short of amazing.
I think the
So
first instance of, I think உலகத்திலே வந்து முதல் வாட்டி வந்து musical dubbing நான் கேள்விப்பட்டிருக்கேன் இங்க. I have never heard anything like that, right? Like you have everything
exactly.
edited, you have everybody lip syncing to a certain beat, and
Mm-hmm.
he's basically composing to that. That is a level of genius that I think very few people can emulate, right? And the
Yep.
effect, you know what, you wouldn't realize it. I mean, fine, I said that I didn't like Ramananu Babarananu, but then that's my personal opinion. It's not, has nothing to do with the way it turned out because of the situation. It's just a personal taste thing, right? And that
Mm-hmm.
tells you how polished it was. I mean, you kind of have these sort of phantom films, I like to call them, where one director விட்டுட்டு போவாரு, another director picks it up, and then you kind of see all that lack of cohesion. But here, Ilayaraja
Right.
does not only makes it cohesive, he elevates it, especially in the score, right?
Yeah, and for me,
Truthfully,
my favorite score would be the parts where Kamal has drunk the Somavanam, and then you
yes,
can
yes,
clearly like sense like it's very like subtle, but there's this sense of like you can hear almost like a heart or a consciousness beating as Kamal steps into like
yeah,
he's following the Abhyankar character.
yeah,
Everything from that sequence on, and everything that happens inside the room, like that whole music
yeah,
sequence from there, and then like you said the making love sequence with Vasundra's character, and then all of that, like the way he complemented the illusions that are happening
yeah,
during all of that, that was probably like one of my favorites for
yeah.
sure.
Yeah, I think in since you mentioned Vasundhara, right? I think just a hat tip to the supporting cast. I think everybody really
Yep.
committed to this film, like big time, right?
Hmm.
I
Yep.
mean, they really pushed themselves as performers in this film, right? I think if I take, say, um, SRK as an example, right? We're talking about an
Hmm.
SRK was actually at his peak, Apo, right? I
Yep,
mean, this is
exactly.
post Kuch Kuch Hota Hai, post DDLJ and whatnot. So for Kohli listeners who are not aware, these are films that basically made SRK the superstar of Bollywood. Like these are like massive, massive, massive films. DDLJ வந்து பத்து வருஷம் 15 வருஷம்லாம் ஓடித்து ஒரு தியேட்டர்ல. So it's that big,
Hmm.
right? And
Right.
he decided to do a supporting role where, let's face it, he doesn't have any scene stealing moments as such, because firstly the film doesn't allow for
Yeah.
that. Secondly, because the
Mm.
narrative is so heavily focused on Saket's mental journey, right? He's there in literally every frame. Saket masalarde. Amjad Vande is just part of the proceedings. He's important, but he's actually the key driver in Saket kind of changing his sort of
Hmm.
mindset or ideology towards the end, or one of the cruxes, I would say. But then he's still playing
Right.
second fiddle, big time, from a narrator
Yep.
standpoint as well as a character standpoint, right? So, and he was happy to do it and also dub in his own voice in a language that he doesn't speak,
Hmm.
right?
Yep. And I
That was
also,
one
if
thing.
I recall, he didn't take any payment for this
No, he
movie,
didn't.
I
He
think.
didn't. I think what he did
Right.
was I think Kamal mentioned it in an interview. So apparently, the only thing he gave him was a watch or something like that. And then later on, because the film was produced, co-produced by Jamu Sugant in Hindi. Later on,
Right.
I think Red Chilies, they acquired the Hindi version of the film.
Correct.
So
Right.
any
Okay, got
royalty
it.
for that, I think, goes directly to SRK. So
Hmm.
Kamal has kind of given up on that. So, and he said that he's very happy that he got it, right. That SRK did it.
Yep.
And other, see, that is why Kamal is Kamal. That because of the immense respect that he commands across industries, right? People just showed up. I mean, think of it this way,
Yep.
right? Like, you're Hema Malini, who's never done a Tamil film, as far as I'm aware, who show up for like a 5 minute character, chumma,
Hmm.
right? You have
Exactly.
again, you have Rani Mukherjee, again, very popular at that time. Again, post Kuch Kuch Hota Hai and Gulam and all those other films, that she was really big up. I would say she was right next to Kajol and probably in the same tier as say Preeti Zinta and whatnot on the timeline. Again, she comes for
Hmm.
barely 15-20 minutes in the film, and very important character. And by the way, one of her strongest performances in those 15-20 minutes, a very very haunting performance as well. It's, in fact, that the direct action day scenes are really hard to sit through. Like, they're very very painful,
Yep. They're very dark.
very very
Yep.
dark. I mean, it's like you can't watch it. You really cannot watch it. I
Hmm.
mean, I cannot. I can't. Even a lot of those things are like not visual but oral, like sound wise, or point apro.
Hmm.
You just can't listen to it. It's just too much. So I think you had people like these really committing and elevating this film. I would say, I think that kind of you know made Heyram.
I would
um,
also say that I think most people made up their minds before the movie even came out.
Agreed.
Like, I think
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
the perception from the music director walking out was that, this movie was not going to be favorably shown for Hindus. And then there were
yeah,
people who
yeah, yeah,
felt that Gandhi was going to be shown in a bad light.
yeah,
Muslim people felt that they were going to be shown in a bad light.
yeah,
Obviously, I
yeah, yeah,
think some of the riot scenes in the beginning, I think they assumed that that's making a statement on things. And so they never were really willing to
yeah,
give a chance. So I think it's funny for a movie that is trying to have a message about unity and goes beyond it.
yeah.
The reactions to it at the time, yeah,
It's
were pretty
ironic in
ironical.
many ways, right? Like, everybody missed the damn
Mhm,
point, and most of them,
mhm.
like you said, made up their mind before watching it and giving it a chance, right? I think if people had just gone
Exactly.
in with
Yeah.
an open mind, they would have realized that இவங்க சொன்ன நினைச்ச மாதிரிலாம் ஒன்றும் இல்லை இந்த படத்துல. It's not anti or pro anything.
Mhm.
I think, yeah, we'll talk about the message in a bit, which I did have certain sort of challenges with it in some ways, but it was not a
Mhm.
wrong message or anything like that, right? It wasn't one that
Right.
was questionable in many ways, in some sense, which I think is a nice segue to the next bit. Like, what could have been better in this? I mean, we're talking about one of Tamil cinema's most iconic films, right? But and I think it'll be very very challenging to find some issues with it. But
Mhm.
were there elements, or were there things that didn't work for you, Pirate?
I think so. First of all, I'm trying to think about it from the aspects of the runtime of the movie
Yeah,
and how much, like as we mentioned earlier, we both mentioned how the crux of the film is about Saket Ram's psyche and his journey to, and he explicitly says this early on in the movie when he goes back to Calcutta and
yeah,
he talks with his Nair.
yeah,
He tells him how he's looking for Saket Ram, and the whole movie is about him, the current person who he is the same person when he's searching for the Atma, right? So that is the movie.
Yeah.
But I think the way the film tries to connect it towards the end, where it seems like the puzzle has fit, like it seems like the body and the soul have been connected,
Yeah.
is through the sequences of the stuff that happens when he goes to the Azad soda factory.
Yeah.
The conversations that he has with Amjad's character, and
Yeah.
then later on, like talking with Mahatma Gandhi.
Yeah.
My only concern about that, my only, I think my reaction to it is I felt that the change of heart and the change of character
Yeah.
could have also been explored to the same extent.
Completely
Like it
agree.
felt a little rushed.
Completely
Mhm.
agree. I
Yep, that was
think,
my big problem.
yeah, I completely agree with that. That to me was a miss, and I think was a big miss in my opinion, because I think
Hmm.
until the point, see him kind of becoming this man possessed with whatever was explored so
Hmm.
brilliantly, right? You understand
Hmm.
every decision he takes. You might not agree with it, but you understand his the reasoning that he's taking in order to justify being part of that movement. Everything makes sense.
Right.
But the way he kind of does it 180 on that is so rushed and so sudden, which I get.
Hmm.
See, ultimately I think Kamal's aim was to promote some sense of communal harmony and say that, you know what, we should all, and him being a avowed Gandhian himself, right? I think he really wanted to get that message across. I think that message just got, it was not delivered in a proper, in a very good way. Let's put it that way. It was very rushed. I mean, not a problem with the message. I think
Hmm.
just the way it was conveyed was probably a bit all over the place. I guess,
Hmm.
realistically, right? In the படம் வந்து 20, I mean 2025 நீங்க எடுத்தீங்கன்னா, it would probably be like a mini series, and you might have had the opportunity to go a bit deeper with that narrative. The other thing,
The
right? And
frustrating thing is,
yeah,
sorry, just one thing
oh
to
yeah,
add
yeah,
to
sure.
that point there. A frustrating thing I felt is even though that was rushed, I felt that he had the pieces.
Yes,
So essentially, like there
exactly,
are two things that
exactly.
connect it. One is he's often, no matter how radicalized he has become, there is always this haunting, and that really affected me when I watched the movies. There's always this one haunting memory of the little girl that he leaves and abandons in
Yeah,
that little hut
yeah,
after her father's been killed. That
yeah,
character, I think, could have been the bridge to getting him to this point, and I felt like
yeah,
that's why that character sort of exists. But the
yeah,
second thing too is when there's the scene where I think Kamal like finally clicks that, like, Gandhi's message is the thing, is it's a connective tissue between the Amjad's character's message that connects him to Gandhi. So basically,
yeah,
Gandhi says the same thing that Amjad said,
exactly.
um,
Yeah,
which is when he knelt down and said, "I will take this bullet for every wrong thing that's happened to you,
yeah,
and I'll forgive you for what like happened to my father."
yeah,
And that's pretty much what Gandhi says in a different way, and that's sort of what makes Kamal's character click. That
yeah,
he has been wrong through this, but as we discussed, I felt like it kind of gets it to like this very weird point. It's rushed and it just doesn't feel earned when Kamal makes this comment to Gandhi that I'm going to deny you the denial of
yeah,
you
yeah,
know
yeah, yeah. It's a
things that
great
you
line,
brought to
by the way.
Mahatma. That, yeah, exactly. But it just feels unearned at that moment
Yeah,
just
yeah.
because of all the things we mentioned. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, right, in some sense, right, I think the movie tries to end on a slightly optimistic note, right? But I think, if I were to, if I had like, if I were to be a little egregious, right, I think the movie should have been a little more somber, right? Maybe you
Hmm.
kind of, and I think, right, the moment when old Kamal, when he in that ambulance, right, he tells his grandson and the doctor, right, இன்னுமா
Hmm.
நடக்கிறது, like are people still rioting on communal lines today? I think,
Hmm.
to me, that would have probably been a better sort of fitting end to kind of show that it's unfortunately a vicious cycle that keeps going on and on, on and on, on and on, right? And you had one
Yeah.
Saketram who got caught in that maelstrom, who decided to go down a path, but for whatever
Hmm.
reason he was not the one who ended up doing the deed. It was someone else. But then this cyclical piece keeps on continuing, right? And to me, to be very honest, and that's why I think the film teeters on giving a very idealistic and a hopeful message. I just find
Hmm.
it a bit disconnected from reality, and maybe this is the cynic in me speaking more than anything else, right? and it's a very personal
Mhm.
opinion. I don't think it's necessarily wrong what they showed or anything like that. It's just a personal opinion. I think it just, to me, everything else was so realistically shown. I think if it
Right.
had ended on a slightly somber note, I think that would have made the film a lot more thoughtful, in my opinion. Whereas Ipavande, it feels
Mhm.
like, you know what, let's just all follow Gandhiji's ideology and things will take care of themselves. Whereas I think life and the world is a lot more complex than that. Anything else,
Yeah.
Pirate, that you want to share about the film before we kind of close out this very interesting conversation?
Yeah, I think anybody who's interested or who's sort of fascinated with the historical stuff, obviously the movie is not meant for that. I think they should definitely. So this has been one of my most interesting, like, sort of things that I've been trying to understand, like why the partition happened and what are sort of the
Yeah,
conditions that led to it, right? If you think of it as like sort of like a pressure cooker situation,
yeah,
what led to those moments? And I think to get to someone's like unbiased opinion, I think like there's a B.R. Ambedkar book called
yeah,
Pakistan or the Partition of India. Ambedkar himself argues that this is a book that like every Indian should read,
yeah,
and so I really feel like it it should be. And if you read that and come to this movie, I think you'll get a sense of you'll create your own opinions about where does Kamal stand, like what is the message of this movie, and you'll kind of like see through that some of the things that happened in the movie
yeah,
were inevitable, unfortunately, which is the somber point that I think you're bringing up.
yeah.
And yeah, that's essentially what is the most uh, sober part of this story, is that there is nothing that could have happened in with all of these different actors who are so important to the Indian national struggle for freedom from British and all of this stuff, that it just went the way it went. And the more I read that book, the more I get the sense that there could have been nothing that could have prevented it. And so looking at it from that point of view and seeing the film just leaves you in this sort of like in this taste of what happened to Sakit Ram. Like, you
Yeah,
know how they say, like, if you can go back, could you change things? I feel like no matter how many times you put Sakit Ram in this story of in this history, I feel like he's going to end up having these same emotional
yeah,
scars and same emotional journey,
yeah.
and he's going to end up in that situation. Which for me, yeah, it was that always just leaves me in a in
It
a depressed
is,
state.
yeah, yeah. It also kind of highlights the power of the film in some ways, right? Like how many films can
Mhm.
make you really question history, or at least make you revisit history with a lot of interest. Let's put it that way. Question people's psyche and whatnot. Right? I think in that sense, this film is a masterclass of, pushing the envelope and making people think. People who haven't watched this film, please do watch it. And again, we would like to really, really emphasize that it's not an easy film to sit through. It can really test you
Mhm.
in multiple ways, emotionally as well. So please be very mentally prepared if you've not seen this film. But I think if you're a cine lover, you'll come out being thankful that you watched it. And
Yep.
I just feel a bit sad on another note that I don't think we'll ever get a film like Hey Ram ever again from even Kamal, given where he is in age wise, and also, let's face it, I mean, he has to juggle multiple things, and more so considering that he really, really burnt his fingers big time with this and Maradanayakam. Like, it put him in debt for like years and years and years, right? And it took him ages before he got
Exactly.
out. So I don't think he'll ever see it. It is what it is. I mean, it's one of those films that needs to be watched by every person who's interested in cinema. And I go to the extent of saying anybody independent of language, culture, or
Yep.
nationhood even should watch this film, because I think it's one of those rare films that can actually transcend sort of cultural nuances in many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Siege mentioned, since everyone should watch this film, it's also available on YouTube for free on Raj
Yes, yeah,
Kamal
yeah, yeah, yeah.
International website.
They
Yeah,
released it last year,
on
right?
the
Yeah,
channel. Yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
I believe in some countries you might even find the Hindi version on Prime. So in case you are a non-Tamilian who's more comfortable with Hindi, I think the Hindi version can also be found online fairly easily. So please do check it
hmm
out. Right.
Yep. Absolutely.
Excellent. So, Pirate, I think this was a really great conversation. Really enjoyed
Yeah.
this discussion, and I hope, and I'm sure you do as well, that our listeners also enjoyed listening to us. So, r slash Kohli fam, please do Give us your feedback. Bouquets are welcome. Brickbats even more so. We are a we always love to engage with our audience. So please do comment on this video. Do share your feedback. And yeah, if you would like to join any of our future podcasts, please do reach out to us, and then yeah, we'll make that happen. And yeah,
Awesome.
see you soon in the very next episode of the r/Hollywood podcast. Peace out.
Thank you.